All right, so who of you have ever thought of changing the firmware on your fridge? Or your car? Your car, yes, okay. Maybe your like camera, like there are custom firmware for cameras. Everybody done that? Yeah? Yeah? See, that's a weird thing. Like in mining, it's somehow completely normal that we change firmwares. Like where everybody else, like I said, like there's nobody ever thought about changing their firmware on their fridge. So I want to talk about today, like where this firmware is coming from, why we're having it, and the future. So, but before we jump in, I'll let each of you shortly introduce yourself. Give me like a 30-second, like who you are, where you're working, and what you do with firmware all day long.
My name's David Urlacher. I work for Luxor Technology. I'm actually local here to the Denver area. And I've been with Luxor almost 3 years. We released LuxOS in March of 2023, so we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary. And yeah, it's just been a great ride being in the industry, building firmware that supports many of the needs of y'all. We've got machines running out there and back here running LuxOS and other third-party firmware that with stock firmware you wouldn't be able to do. So to answer, well, I'll leave that for,
let's get there.
We'll just do the intro. So yeah, that's who I am. I've enjoyed talking to all of you and look forward to connecting with more of you today.
I'm Brett. I am mostly on the firmware control side of things. I was up on a panel here earlier about controlling hashrate heaters. I just have a lot of experience interfacing with a lot of different types of firmware, so I have a lot of feedback and bullying to do on the firmware manufacturers, so you get to hear some of that today.
My name is Adam Ortoff. I work with a company called Upstream Data. I primarily work on the business development side, working with oil and gas producers, helping them monetize hydrocarbons they can't otherwise bring to market, as well as I've been using miners to heat my home for, 7 years or so now, and been a tinkerer, an obsessive tinkerer for a while.
All right, so let's start. Before we jump into custom firmware, let's talk a bit about like just the stock firmware. So I think that's some of the things that for the people that I helped, like installing their systems. Yeah. So let's say you buy, doesn't matter if it's a Bitmain or a WhatsMiner, you buy the device from them directly. It has never been touched. It comes directly from. What is the experience, Adam, like when you open it up and start it up?
I mean, it's kind of a fun dichotomy because it's, you have some of the most advanced chip manufacturing going on, right? Some of the 3 nanometer printing, and then you have some of the most archaic, dumb interface I've ever experienced, right? It's like I don't even really know what to compare it to. Like maybe first gen email.
You can compare it to OpenWRT because that's what most of it is.
Exactly. And so while it's archaic and it's actually, even if you're tech savvy, it actually throws you for a loop, right? Because the interface is so raw. I mean, it doesn't even refresh live. You have to, like WhatsMiner, right? You have to just constantly hit refresh every time you want to get an update on the fan speed or the board temps. And so it's just like this very stupid, basic code.
So Brett, you've interacted obviously with a lot of stock firmware. Like, any favorites?
Too much.
Or maybe do you have an idea why is it so archaic?
Well, it sort of depends on the stock firmware. Like Bitmain has been getting better and better at their GUI, which is the thing that most people are going to interact with. But like the APIs just are completely worse on Bitmain than every other place, right? WhatsMiner, they haven't changed their GUI in probably 3 years. It still looks like OpenWRT. If anybody's ever used the old open source version of Brains OS, you know what that looks like. It's pretty much the same thing. Brains actually did some modifications to it to make it look a little better, but yeah, like WhatsMiner stock firmware looks like crap, but you have a lot more control over it through the APIs. Something like Canaan is kind of a happy medium. Like their GUI isn't as nice as Bitmain's, but it's not bad. But their APIs are like complicated, but it's not to the level of stupidity that Bitmain does. So there's kind of a wide range of levels of bad with stock firmware.
So
they're all bad.
So question to the room, for all the people that have a Bitmain, who still runs stock Bitmain? Nobody. Awesome. So David, like, what is it that as a company, like, I don't think it's just like something that you say on a Saturday morning, oh, let's build a custom firmware. Like, what is it that you really felt like, okay, let's invest probably thousands, 10,000s, maybe even hundred thousands of dollars. I don't know if you can tell us what is invest, like what was it behind that you said, we're gonna make this investment?
Yeah, so really quick, I want to address the stock firmware thing.
Yeah.
What I was going to try to say in the intro is it's an on-off. When you get a new Bitmain miner, you open it up, you put a pool in, and you plug it in. You plug it in, put a pool in. It's hashing at its default settings. And if you're lucky, it might come with a low power mode or high power mode, so you can underclock one setting or overclock one setting. All the stuff running that you see here is powered by third-party firmware that opens the door for underclocking if you want to be able to run from a normal outlet, or overclocking if you're trying to heat water up to temps that you can climb into in the snow. So for Luxor to invest into a firmware product, we saw a need in the market and a good business opportunity for that. And Luxor, the founders, founded by four wonderful guys, they decided to move forward with a firmware product line back in, I guess, late 2022, and I came along pretty shortly thereafter in 2022. I guess it was probably 2021. We've been going full steam ahead, trying to meet the needs of large and small miners alike. And
When are you guys going to get rid of presets? Meet that need.
Presets?
Presets.
We are actually going to be moving away from that very soon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's say you're Luxor and you're saying like, hey, I want to have a custom firmware. So I assume you go to Bitmain and saying like, hey, I want to build a custom firmware. They give you a data sheet. Yes, this is how you install the firmware.
No.
Like, tell us like, I know. So tell us like how hard is it actually to make a custom firmware and install it?
There's two main pieces that I was talking to a few of you about. One is we don't have data sheets for the ASIC chips. We have to reverse engineer everything. Brett was talking about all the reverse engineering he does for the API and being able to talk to it. Well, we're taking that to the next level. What does that communication layer look like from the control board to the ASIC chips? There's a couple main interfaces. You have I2C, you have serial ports, UART. And so you reverse engineer that. But the harder part is what I call the Luxor firmware hacker team. They have to figure out how can we remote install onto this control board. We don't have any, Bitmain's not giving us any information to do that. That's a very complex task. You're trying to figure out how do I take control of this board to be able to put my application on there. And so that's the two main pieces, because let's be realistic, doing control board swaps at scale doesn't work well. So to have making your own firmware be a viable product, because it is a huge investment for a company to do that, you have to go after the bigger markets. You know, for us plebs, we can swap a control board on our 2, 3, 4 machines, no problem, not a big deal. But you have to be able to do that remote installation for the bigger market, right? But running from SD card, that worked great for a while too. But then Amlogic came along; they don't have an SD card on those control boards. Also, can I go back to the early session? I just want to say, Bitmain on the CVI Tech board did add a temp sensor onto that control board. LuxOS doesn't interface with it yet, but that's kind of an ambient temp. I also have an S21 Plus at home. Bitmain firmware reports an ambient temperature on that machine. I haven't figured that out yet, where they're getting that from, but working on it. So, you know.
Probably inside the power supply, I would expect, right?
Maybe.
That would be my guess, yeah.
It's a good guess, yeah. Good guess.
So Brett, if we have a custom firmware installed, you obviously know a lot about what these differences can do. What are like some of the features that you really see? Like, why should somebody even install custom firmware? What is possible as soon as you've done that?
There's a lot of reasons you'd want to install custom firmware, and it sort of depends on your use case, right? For someone like Schnitzel and his Home Assistant integration, it makes a lot of sense to install some aftermarket firmware because you get the auto-tuning abilities through the API. So you get an easier interface programmatically, and then you also have the ability to do a lot more control with those miners, so you can really optimize what you're getting out of them. even if you're somebody who's not deploying something like that, you look at LuxOS or BrainsOS, where they've got features like ATM, automatic thermal management, or dynamic power scaling on BrainsOS, which is essentially you set a power limit, and then if the miner gets too hot, it'll actually downclock to try to keep the miner from overheating and breaking itself. You have things like pool quotas. So if you wanted to split some hash rate for whatever reason, say you're renting out a machine to somebody and you want to have 10% of the hash rate go to you as like a fee, well, you can do that with aftermarket firmware. There's a lot of good reasons to go to aftermarket firmware on just the user perspective side. There's also a lot of reasons to go to aftermarket firmware from the programmer side. It makes control a lot easier. Usually the control systems are much more efficient. The way you gather data is much more efficient. There's less stupid design decisions made for the programmers to deal with and interact with. You're usually getting data from one standard location rather than 5. There's a lot of reasons.
I mean, I would say it's certainly foundational for heat reuse, right? Like one of the greatest things about custom firmware is the ability to you can set different paramount variables, right? So you can have temperature kind of be your primary variable. And so then maybe you drastically underclock a machine, but you want it to sit around, 75 PCB temp because you want hot air for, reuse or something. Without custom firmware, like heat reuse is not even a discussion that can really happen, right? It's just not going to.
Yeah, just stick some pools in there and hope it works.
It would be a very inefficient and clunky attempt to try to leverage this waste heat product. And so I think it's important to at least just say that the custom firmware is the foundation of the next level, which is being able to integrate into heat systems.
Yeah. So one thing we haven't talked about that custom firmware allows is like the tuning. If anybody of you can give us a short overview what the tuning actually is, and then maybe David, if you can give us a little bit deeper, how does it actually work? Because it's just a button that I enable and it does stuff. But let's look at shortly. Maybe Adam, give us a short overview what tuning is. What are we using?
I mean, David could speak to it better than us up here, I think.
But as a user of it, why would you enable tuning?
So I would enable it because the system's going to step through various voltages, frequencies, and figure out which grouping of these variables outputs the most amount of hash work or
so
hash
it makes
power,
it more
right?
efficient.
Yes, it's obvious. It's efficiency from a kilowatt, a watt to terahash standpoint. But I think also from a temperature,
so
if a stable temperature standpoint.
If you compare to stock, the stock will all run this. Each of the chip will run at a preset defined.
It depends on the stock. Bitmain, so Bitmain does something really, really stupid where they just go, oh, we're just going to use this same default setting across all of these chips, across every chipset for this specific chip type. WattsMiner gets a little bit more advanced, but essentially the core of all of the tuning is the same thing. You have some cores on your chips that are going to do the process. Say you have, 8 hashing cores per chip, and then you have N chips, say 100 chips. So you have 800 cores, and then you clock those at a certain speed. So you might do, say 3 times per second. It's considerably faster than that. It's multiple millions of times per second usually, but you're going to do that multiple times per second, and so each of those is then going to produce a hash output at every clock cycle. So that's where your voltage and your frequency comes in. Your frequency is how often you're doing that calculation. And so you set the frequency, and then you just bring the voltage down as low as you possibly can before chips start breaking. You bring it up a little bit, and that's pretty much your optimal place because your power consumption is your amperage, which is kind of going to be based off your frequency a little bit, and then multiply that by your voltage, which is you can modulate. So you want to have the lowest possible voltage you can, and that's how you get your power consumption.
I mean, in terms of efficiency, right, Brett, you did this the other day with an S21 Pro that's rated for 234 terahash, just running brains without changing any wattage, just doing brains and having them optimize. I think it got up to 250 about. So
yeah, it was 240, 250, and it's running 500 watts lower than stock firmware.
Yeah, so it's
it's just because they're actually doing some amount of work. Bitmain just says we're just going to throw this default config at everything. Brains goes, okay, well, how do we actually optimize each chip? How do we get the best frequency and then lower the voltage as much as we possibly can to have the most efficient possible setup for each of these chips?
Yeah, and as a user, I mean, it's kind of what makes being an at-home guerrilla miner, certainly for heat reuse, pragmatic from an economic standpoint, right? I mean, I'm running a J Pro at my house, and when I underclock it and optimize it and get it at a static temperature, I get it down to 22 watt per terahash. That's nearly 30% more efficient, like more thermoelectrically efficient, more economically efficient than the stock, like what its nominal stock rating is. I mean, that's literally like years of new chip production jumps, right? So, I mean, I even could foresee a world where firmware is what makes the difference. Firmware allows an efficiency jump that's greater than from one chip generation to the next.
Yeah, and I think we've seen even some of the big miners saying instead of buying the newest generation of miners all the time, that usually cost 2 to 3 times than just the generation before. What they rather do is buy the generation before, underclock them, get the same joules per terahash out of it, and actually overall have a much better system.
And not only that, you have better OpEx on that because you're repairing miners less often because you're underclocking them. Things are breaking less. You have less like thermal throttling. You're getting less thermal cycling, so your silicon doesn't expand as much when you're turning them on and off or stuff like that. Like there's so many advantages to using that model.
So, David, let's go a bit deeper into the actual tuning. Like my understanding is that all these chips, like on a hash board, are actually in series. So you can't tell us a little bit how do you actually talk to these chips on a board, and what really can you do in terms of modifying them?
Yeah, actually, Brett did a really great job giving a summary of that process of your 2 main variables, voltage and frequency. And as you increase frequency or decrease it, you're overclocking or underclocking. The frequency is a digital clock, a pulsing 0101 signal running at that rate, typically measured in megahertz in miners or gigahertz in your CPUs. And so, yeah, those are the 2 main variables, but you also have the variable of temperature, which we love here because we're using that one as heat. And all of that drives the power consumption. And that's, like Brett said, power equals voltage times current. So your voltage is fixed DC voltage by what you set your power supply at. And that's going to be what it draws off the AC power for what it needs to get to that. And then that dictates what current is drawn. And the goal of tuning is to maximize your efficiency at a hash rate target. That's one idea of tuning. And so in the LuxOS Auto Tuner, that's a goal. You pick your hash rate. We're going to give you the best efficiency. We're going to figure out what voltage we can operate at before we start to degrade the performance. Because if you don't give the chips enough voltage, they'll start to go unhealthy. They aren't going to hash optimally. And then your efficiency goes down because your hash rate's going down. The efficiency equation is a hash rate and power equation. So with that said, there's other ways to tune. You could tune for power. What we call ATM, Automatic Thermal Management in LuxOS, is the idea of tuning to a temperature setting. And that's great for us here in the room. And folks have talked about using that. Antoine, who was up here in the last session, was talking about using ATM, I believe. And the goal there is you set your temperature target, and we're going to try to maintain that target. And that works great in hot environments, too, when you're trying to keep your machines cool enough so that they don't hit the point where they're going to shut down. They can underclock instead and keep operating. And that could work the same in an immersion tank where you want it to be running at the max that it can, pedal to the metal, but not to the point that it's going to turn off and shut down because it over-temped a board. So, the details of the tuning algorithm are trying to balance it's a multivariable equation. In an air-cooled system, the fans are an equation too, because that's affecting your temperature. How fast are they operating at? So it's this whole idea of balancing everything together. So it depends on the machine, but the chips are series parallel. They're grouped in domains, and there's series groups of chips across that parallel positive voltage and ground. And that it depends heavily on the machine, but Bitmain and all of their newer machines are going with groups of 7 to 11 chips and maybe, 7 to 12 or 13 domains, and even more on Hydro machines. Oh, sorry, maybe I wasn't talking into the mic very good. But But yeah,
You can change only per domain. So the chips that are in one domain, they will all have the same megahertz and voltage.
So yeah, the voltage is a fixed setting. All the voltage except for S9, but S17 and newer. Just talking Antminer here. The chips the boards are connected to the bus bars from the power supply. So your voltage
It's
is
the same
constant.
on Wattsminers.
Same on Wattsminer. That's true.
So they all run in the same voltage.
Same voltage, but you can adjust the frequency of chips and domains independently. And there's some debate there for how much you should do that. But that gets into the idea of domain-based tuning, where you can do even more fine-tuning to adjust your frequencies within this group of chips. And we've experimented with that with LuxOS, and there becomes this point of diminishing return where at what point is your auto-tuner just going in the weeds and you're not going to be able to squeeze any more out of the machine. But one more thing I want to say, and then I'll stop talking, is our API allows all of you to make your own tuner if you want. And a lot of times we're developing some of the algos that we're going to implement into our actual code base in Python, exercising our API. And I talked to someone yesterday who did their own PID fan controller for our firmware externally, just using our API. And you can do the same thing and build your own tuner if you have the expertise and you want to do that. And our API is very well documented. So the sky's the limit if you want to go down that path.
Okay, thank you. But that's basically why the tuning takes a little bit, because it's basically the firmware going through all these different variables, adapting them, and the only thing you can do is you can change them and see how the chips react. Like there's no, you can't talk to the chip and saying like, what's your preferred clock rate? Like there's no such thing.
Yeah. So the flow chart, it's kind of a feedback loop. The flow chart is you tweak the setting. You have your starting point. You tweak a setting. Typically, you're trying to push the voltage lower. Maybe your frequency is fixed if you're just trying to optimize at a hash rate. You tweak that voltage, and then the feedback loop is your chip health. Okay. We know what that is, and if the chips are just as healthy or maybe slightly less at that next voltage step, then let's go another step. Let's go another step. Once we see that things are falling apart, then that's where we need to stabilize and probably step up, like Brett said.
And so what do we think as a group? Like why, if this is a possibility, why does the stock firmware not do this?
I mean, I think we kind of made the point earlier, right? Like I think certainly from Bitmain just having a set point, it doesn't really change their economics of how many units they sell, right? I don't think it would render them more profitable.
But isn't it funny that they always bout about like, oh, we have this amount joules per terahash and this amount terahash. Like they could even
And
show
then you
even
turn
better
it on
numbers.
and it's like any warmer than plus 10 Celsius and the chips are like exploding and
I was going to
you're
say
using 4 times the wattage that you want to be.
I was going to say, yeah. I mean, they often tout their joules per terahash. They never mention at what temperature, right? Which is a very important variable. Yeah, it's a little deceptive, but I think it's a matter of like this could go a conversation all the way to just how large the obstacles are in chip fabrication, like how costly it is. I mean, I always tell people like they don't throw any chips away, right? That's why there's S19J Pro and S19J Pro Plus and K Pro and K Pro Plus, and like it's because anything that comes off the fab line, they've got to package it and monetize it. And
it's the same thing with regular CPUs. That's why you have different levels within the same like version of a CPU. You've got your i3, i5, i7. Those are just different grades of chips.
Right. So I mean, I think zooming out from the standpoint of how early are we to a world where integrating Bitcoin miners into heating systems or into any other waste power. Why doesn't your toaster mine Bitcoin while it's producing heat to toast your bread? We're still very early on, and we're trudging through the commoditization of this hardware, right? The commoditization of these chips, where everybody's really kind of playing with the same units, and it's one big factor of that is chip fabrication costs, and they're so huge, right? I mean, it's like minimum investment for a sub 10 nanometer chip fabrication facility is like $5 billion or something, and it's pretty monopolized, oligopolized from a hardware standpoint. That the actual machines you need, the tools. So it's just from a humanity standpoint, it's very early. We more money invested in chip production is a good thing. In years and years, as this hardware commoditizes, it'll become so much more straightforward to integrate.
Yeah.
Bitmain needs more competitors. That's
Yeah.
basically
Yeah.
TLDR. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go to another space. For the people that were on the panel that I was, I'm not only a Bitcoin maxi, I'm also an open source maxi. So let's talk a bit about the history. Like one of the fun things is if you actually connect to these miners and you look at like what is running, you see like these CG miners sometimes.
Not the GPL3 compliance issues.
No, but like funny is actually CG miner means CPU and GPU miner. So it's coming from a past where the only time that we could actually mine was CPU and GPUs, and then CK, he produced that open source. So funny enough, these things were open source in the beginning, but today we don't have an open source firmware anymore. So
You can still find CG miner source code, like it still is out there. CK still has his copies of it. You can still look at the API documentation, and you can then go look at stock firmware and see that it produces the exact same API endpoints and the same API outputs.
yeah.
Yeah, they
So
basically took the open source and kind of ran with it.
Yeah. So we used to have Brains, which was open source. They took it down, even though, yes, technically by GPL, like it should still be.
People have got forks of
Yeah.
Boss Miner. I've got one.
Then we have LuxOS, which is also not open source. Or maybe a question directly, like when you decided to do all of this, why is it not open source?
So, first of all, that's not my decision to make. I work for Luxor. They're a wonderful employer, and when Luxor made the decision to get into the firmware space, that was a business decision, and there is a business side to decision making. Just like Bitmain, why don't they make good firmware? Their business is building hardware. They don't really care about the firmware. I don't think they care that people are installing Brains or LuxOS or Vanish.
Well, they obviously do a little bit. They keep trying to patch your damn exploits.
Maybe a little bit, but also like people are buying their hardware because there's, we're not going to buy their hardware to use it for heat if their firmware doesn't work. We're buying it to use it for heat because we can install LuxOS or something else on there and make it do what we want to do. And so, yes, we're closed source to a point, but our API is very well documented, and that opens and unlocks for whatever anyone wants to build. I mean, I've talked to so many builders here. I think about some of the products I see, like 100 Acres Ranch builds a thermohashostat, and that is possible because our API is very open, and we want to just unlock the hardware. So. And we're also open to feedback and making changes based on feedback from large customers all the way down to the plebs like myself.
Why do you think I was bugging him about presets?
We've been talking about getting rid of that for a while. So some history on that. The presets was a convenient way for people to pick kind of a built-in setting, but you can always build your own custom profile. And that was pre-auto-tuner. We're later to the game than other third-party firmwares. Now that we have auto-tuning working well, we are looking at removing the presets because it is kind of a confusing thing. But at the same time, leave the ability to put your own custom profiles in there. And that works well with our ATM model as well. So,
train of thought gone. Just gone. Oh, the business case for why you wouldn't open source this is pretty simple. Everybody is trying to do something different on the tuner. There's a little bit of intellectual property in that, hey, we're building our auto tuner this way, and here's the specific steps we're taking to optimize these chips. I think that's kind of the main reason why nobody wants to open source the firmware, is because like if you release your auto tuner, then like if you're doing something super unique that's more efficient than anyone else, everybody else is just gonna like take that information and go like improve their stuff off of that, and all of a sudden your competitors are kicking your butt and you have no business.
I mean, I think there's something to be said that a lot of this like at least the two predominant firmwares I think of Brains and Luxor happen to be mining pools. I think that certainly plays a factor into the business model, right? How do you attract hash rate, right? Is it just your fee?
Yeah. Let's talk about that. I'm not sure if everybody's aware. So if you install custom third-party firmware, they will actually take some of your hash rate.
It's a dev fee, right? And so the way in which they try to incentivize people mining on their pool is, hey, if you use the firmware and you're on our pool, then we waive the dev fee, right? Like that was the traditional.
Usually they waive the pool fee, yeah.
Or either or, right?
Opposite direction, but yes.
Yes.
It's the
Yeah,
same idea. They cut some of that fee out, so you're paying less.
Right.
Luxor gives you a rebate, so basically you're getting that dev fee back if you use the firmware and the pool.
So, this isn't simply about like use our firmware because we want to necessarily siphon some of the hash rate as a dev fee. It's more we want to attract hash power to our pool in a more creative way than just lowering the fee. I think that brings up another conversation around kind of the gamification of mining pools and such. But attracting hash rate is a challenging problem to try to solve, right? Trying to come up with ways for, hey, why would point hash one way versus the other? It seems the only real substantive tactic has been firmware to this point, right? I haven't seen anything else other than maybe like, you could...
Well, you look at, I guess, like the closest thing would be like Lincoin and Load.
Yeah.
Right? So they're providing a farm management tool, which if you look at what Luxor and Brains are doing, they're also working towards providing farm management tools. You guys have your... Commander, yes.
Yeah.
And like Brains has Toolbox, and even Vanish, like you look at Vanish, they're providing a similar thing. They're providing their little toolbox, but they don't have a pool, obviously. So everybody's kind of implementing different levels of that, like, pools and external tools, and then the firmware.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I would say is, I think if you have the desire to try to build firmware, to try to maybe come out and compete in this game, you might have the basis of, a competitive edge to starting a pool. Right, of attracting hash rate. And, certainly the Bitcoin network and the world could do with more mining pools. I think that's, goes without saying.
So let's go, 2 more topics I want to go into. First is security. Who of you has changed the password of your miners at home?
What is wrong with you people?
Dude, you just don't get it, okay?
So I think that's one of the things that is like not really talked about. Is like literally like there's root, or for the people that don't know, like you just have to type root. You don't even have to type a password.
Brains OS has root, no password. WattsMiner has admin. Stock firmware has root. A lot of aftermarket stuff. Yeah, like you can just memorize all this stuff.
Yeah, so like if I like go to your house and I ask for your Wi-Fi password, I can go in and change all the I can change the pool direction, and so I can steal all your hash rate.
Not my house.
This is an argument for just learning how networks work and learning how to separate networks properly and just.
Sure, like you want to have a DMC and all, like we can go all crazy. What I'm saying, like that's just like, what do you think is like, let's do a postmortem of like in 5 years. What is the news that we're going to talk about that happened because somebody did not change their password on the firmware?
I've speculated before. This was early on, hanging out down at the Houston Bitcoin meetup. A few years ago, we were talking about writing a book or maybe a potential movie about what we called like hash rate barons, right? That snuck onto these giant mining farms and in the middle of the night stole this massive amount of hash rate for 12 hours while everyone was sleeping, right? A few exahash for 12 hours is serious money. Yeah. I mean, an exahash right now is like $60,000 a day. So yeah, I mean, you get 5 of them for 12 hours. You're talking about really hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so, I think so far that hasn't really happened. Hopefully, there doesn't have to be pain before there's remedy. But I would imagine that, that's the case. It seems to be pretty robust, though. Like the networking side of things at a lot of these big mega farms. I mean, they take their networking security very seriously.
It's because networking
right?
security is the most important level of that.
Yeah.
Like, if you really understand the miner side of things, anything on stock firmware, it does not matter what you do. You can change the password. You can do whatever. I can brick your machine so easily if it's on stock firmware, even if you've changed the password. It doesn't matter.
So long as you can get on the network.
Yeah, if I have access to your network and you're running stock firmware, like, I'm sorry, you're borked. Like, it doesn't matter. That's a really big argument for aftermarket firmware. If you're going to change the password, at least they secure things properly when you do change the password. Stock firmware does not at all.
So from the networking security standpoint, though, does having physical access to like a modem in a facility bypass a lot of the networking security,
it depends.
Walls, I guess?
It depends how they've got it set up. Like you can go to different levels of networking security. overall, like networking.
I guess
You have different levels of expertise and how advanced you want to get. If it's on your home network, maybe you just want to have a guest Wi-Fi network that you have people use, right? That is usually the safest bet, something like that.
Put your miners on a Wi-Fi that an actual guest does not go into.
Yeah,
And
I'll tell a story here that's pretty funny. So one of the things that I've reported to WattsMiner and complained about is this exact security issue of that you can just completely bypass their password. For any of you guys who want to know how to do this so that you can deal with it in case somebody does get into your network, the WattsMiner tool just bypasses everything. You can change pools without needing to actually set the password on your miner. And the most important thing actually is you can just factory reset the miner through the WattsMiner tool without ever having to look at the password or enter the password or anything. So say somebody set a password on their WattsMiner, all you do is WattsMiner tool, factory reset, wait a couple seconds, change the pools, change the password, and they're going to have a hell of a time trying to get into their miner web GUI if they don't know what they're doing. So,
And by the way, any like tool that you download on your computer, like could be a game that you download or your children download something. It's extremely simple to just scan the network for Bitcoin miners. Use it because you have not changed your password. Is to just change the pool or brick your miner and just without you maybe not even realizing that it has changed it. So yeah, I really encourage all of you to like put your miners in another Wi-Fi, put them, if you can, put them in a VLAN, change the password, because it's gonna happen.
Well, I mean, I think about the physical security part, because even if you've got the most sophisticated network security, if somebody were to, gain access to a facility, what if they just,
You just walk out with 100 of your miners?
No.
Put them in the back of your truck?
No, they swap out your Ethernet switch with their cellular modem.
Yep.
Boom.
Done.
Game over, right? They just move you just move their miners to your network.
Well, then you have
access,
the case
right?
for monitoring. You have the case for why do you go to aftermarket firmware for better APIs? Well, the reason that all these guys want to do this is because they have really easy oversight over their miners. Okay, well, looks like one rack of my farm went off. Maybe something happened to that rack. Maybe the PDU exploded, or maybe somebody got in there, swapped out the cell modem, changed all the information, and now I don't have access to those miners anymore, and I better go check that out.
Yeah,
all right.
That's what I mean. But I think it's really early, right?
So last topic, we just had the 256 Foundation final block 3 weeks ago. So they now have at least $350,000 that they're going to invest. And one of the things that they said is one of the projects is they want to build a custom firmware, like an open source, everything completely firmware. So let's look a bit into like what will this change? I guess let's start with Luxor. Why? What do you think? What's going to change that for you?
I mean, first of all, I love open source. I think it's great. I think more competition is good. So no issue there. I mean, LuxOS is newer to the market than some other firmware. I think it's been a good thing. I've talked to people here who have preferences in all kinds of different directions, and I think part of that is because different firmware are going to meet different needs for different people and different applications. So that's great. We can all coexist. I think open source coming along is especially good for tinkers like ourselves, people who want to contribute to that and help build what they think is going to meet their need that they're trying to meet that maybe third-party firmware doesn't meet today. So yeah, and at the same time, the folks like Luxor, like Brains, we're also targeting bigger markets and different needs and different niches. So I think the open source is going to be very valuable to a group like we are here. So,
yeah. Brad, what is your?
I would actually directly disagree with that. I think open source is actually much more valuable to large-scale miners because A, they're not paying a dev fee on their massive amount of hash rate, which is super beneficial to them, and all they have to do is maybe look at contributing a little bit if they want a feature. 2, they don't have to go to anyone else if they want a feature. They can just add the thing. 3, they have complete oversight over everything that goes on in that firmware. They don't have to. It's like, oh yeah, you got your SOC2 compliance or whatever, but that's nothing compared to being able to audit ourselves everything, and also being able to make our own version of this if we wanted to for whatever reason. I think the real market for a lot of this open source stuff is actually the larger miners, and the smaller miners are going to benefit massively from that, because with the large miners looking at these open source projects, you're going to have more stability, you're going to have more features being added, you're going to have more efficiency gains. It's just an all-around win-win-win to go to open source.
Yeah, plus you get the benefit of, some tinkerer adding a sweet feature and, as a massive...
Yeah, you have the advantage of regular people doing that and also huge, massive multinational miners doing this.
Yeah, exactly. Like zero marginal cost for that development. But it's... I mean, I understand it, right? It kind of conflicts with the arms race that is, hash power maximization, right? And optimization. I mean, there's really big, there's big money in this. I mean, we're talking about, what? $50 million a day of Bitcoin mining rewards is sent out to all miners on the network. And if you look at that in a dollar-denominated fashion, while the Bitcoin-denominated rewards have gone down drastically, right? There's a lot more miners, and there's halvings every 4 years. The dollar-denominated rewards has gone up substantially. The price has outpaced the halving cycle.
And there's a real incentive to go after 2.5% of that.
Yes, and there's also transaction fees, right? And so, the future potential, you could look at it today, right, and argue, okay, $50 million a day, right? We're talking about what, $18 billion a year of mining rewards. But then you put in a future price of Bitcoin that is a lot higher, and all of a sudden the market potential for mining becomes, like greed is a hell of a drug, and so, there's a lot of investment that gets justified to come this direction, and sadly, open source isn't typically what wins the investment day, but we can change that culture, we can push that.
Yeah. All right, that's it. I think it's extremely exciting to see what's going to happen. Hopefully next year we have this again, and maybe we have another chair here with one of the open source firmware maintainers. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on in the next couple of months around open source and firmware in general. And so it's not going to get boring. Thank you all.
Thank you.